Welcome to the Trenches. I'm your host, Rob McCallum, and this is our ongoing series of interviews with filmmakers from around the world where we get to see what it's like as they're in the trenches. With me is Jordan Morris. Jordan, you designed and helped out a ton on my feature film, Unearthly, not only as a designer, but as a cast member and just all-around facilitator. And now you've worked on a few projects since then, most recently a film called Tapped. Can you tell us what that's about?
Sure. Hello, and thanks for having me back on. Tapped is, well, the biggest film that I've been a part of so far. It was a fortunate turn of events for me. It's essentially a retelling of the Karate Kid type story, except they'd brought in mixed martial arts and the UFC style stuff that's so popular. So the kid, in order to take on and defeat the bad guy, has to learn mixed martial arts.
So MMA version of Karate Kid.
Yeah.
And, was that something that, you're drawn to personally? And I know that we've talked off the air before about, you came on Unearthly because there's elements of Raiders that you really liked, and that was an action-adventure story. But what about the material of Tapped kind of spoke to you, or did it speak to you, or, what do you think?
It wasn't the material so much as the project itself. It was really unusual to have a film of that size shooting right here in my hometown, London, Ontario. It was not a big city. We're 2 hours away from Toronto. And there was a lot of back and forth through the development of this one as to whether or not they were going to shoot it all inside Toronto or not. But in the end, London won the war, and having it right in the backyard made it really interesting to me. There was a lot of opportunity to see what London really had to offer. I mean, there were a lot of locations. There was something like 30 locations. We had upwards of 80 actors, some from Toronto, a few of them local. It was just kind of important politically to get involved in it. And luckily, they thought that I had the chops to take on production design again.
So you were a production designer on Unearthly, the film that I kind of heralded, and now you're a production designer on this. You mentioned that it's probably the biggest film you've been on. What were the differences? Because clearly Unearthly, and I'm sure we'll record something at some point, is like super micro budget, and this seems like it's got a little bit more not just budget behind it, but a little bit more presence. So what as a production designer, how did your role differ, I guess?
Well, it's worlds apart. I mean, if you were to take Unearthly and then this film that we're talking about right now, Tapped, and then say, I don't know, the new RoboCop, each one of those is going to have somebody working that's got the title production designer, but they're really different. So with Unearthly, we didn't even have departments per se. We just had like one person doing this, one person doing that, and everybody kind of speaking through me to get to you to make sure that we were on the same page. With Tapped, we actually had departments. So there was a wardrobe department, and there was a makeup department, and there was an art department. So in Unearthly, it really wasn't an accurate representation as to what Hollywood would call a production designer. And even in Tapped, they were being kind to me to call me production designer. But we did have a full art department, and that was really what my focus was on. If anything, I was probably more of an art director than a production designer because I didn't have any say in, say, wardrobe or makeup or much say in the locations. I did offer some help there and landed a few locations for them too. But typically, a production designer would have a hand in all of this, every single visual element that makes it to the screen: props, costume, makeup, whatever. And I had limited, so much more so than Unearthly, but not as much as you would see in a big budget Hollywood movie.
So you mentioned that there was like 30 locations or so, and you guys were shooting over like 30, 40 days?
Yeah, we were involved for 9 weeks overall, but we were shooting for 4. Yeah.
Okay, so that still sounds like a lot. Like even 30 locations over 9 weeks, that's like 3 locations a week, even if you're not shooting every day. How the hell do you possibly prep for that? And what was that like?
Well, again, I wasn't as big a wheel in this one. I got to be really close to Unearthly because there were just not that many people involved. So once you had kind of bumped me from just an actor to a production designer, then I was close to most of the decisions being made. Even when I wasn't in on them, I was aware of them. But this is a much bigger team of people, and there were a lot of bodies and a lot of negotiations because there's a lot of money involved. So whenever you're spending tons of money, there's a lot of politicking involved. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved in exactly where the money's going to go and who's going to get to spend it. So initially, I think I started doing location. I actually just asked to be involved in every meeting that I possibly could be in. And when the principals were coming in from Toronto to visit the locations and start making decisions about things, I would just ask to be there and start taking in as much information as I could so I knew what I had to deal with. And then things immediately started to go awry, like they often do, because we had only 2 weeks to prep for this thing, which was pretty bananas, in my opinion. You don't compress 4 weeks of shooting into 2 weeks of prep. That math doesn't work for me. So we had a lot of problems. And very early on, the principal location, the focal location, which was the kids' dojo, they had planned on shooting at an actual dojo here in London, and the deal fell through. So with 8 days or something like that, I can't remember what it was. I think it was 8 days from when, no, we have no place to shoot, to shooting in that space, we had to come up with a replacement. And that turned out to be the biggest challenge. And we never really recovered, because once we started dealing with that, then we could never really stay ahead of very much. And we were just beating out fires for 4 weeks. So it was exciting, to say the least.
Okay, so let's maybe just break down that entire story. We'll take as much time as it's necessary. So you get in on just as many meetings as you want, and it's something that I always tell people that want to get into film, or people that are trying to jump up or just be involved. A lot of the stuff that people get is because they're in the right place at the right time. So completely agree. Get involved is just be an ear, be a body around set, be a nodding head, a smiling face.
And know people, because it was your producer of Unearthly that ended up being a producer on this much larger project, and he was the guy that connected the dots and brought myself and my partner into that project as well. That would have been a big and much more difficult jump to make for us if it weren't for the fact that we'd already worked with a couple of people, right? It's who you know.
My producer gets you on, but leaves me out in the cold as I'm struggling to get through visual effects from India and have no budget. But that's another story. No, that's just kidding. Story. Just kidding. Drip, drip. So you're around on meetings, and it sounds like you're going on location scouts with these people a little bit, because you saw, I guess, the original place that they wanted to shoot the dojo?
Yeah, I visited at least twice, if I can remember correctly, because they were just walking through and breaking down the script and trying to choose where their shots would be. So their director of photography was there. He was really inspiring. Really lucky to watch this guy work. His name was Pasha Patriki. Really awesome. Every shot taken of this film, Tapped, is gorgeous. So I'm pretty proud of a lot of the work that the art department did and what we put in front of him. But he could make anything look beautiful. So that was really cool. That was really kind of took it to the next level for me as far as my experience goes there. So he was there, director's there, producers are there, AD is there, and we're walking through this space, which is an actual operating dojo, and we're just trying to figure out how to transform it into what they want the thing to look like. And immediately my instincts told me that we were in trouble, because the owner of the space didn't want it modified. So it's pretty impossible to kind of give it a really unique feel if you're not allowed to throw paint around or move walls around or, do any kind of significant set decking. So that had me nervous right from the get-go. And then we started to hear details about how often the limitations of when we were allowed to shoot within the space. And in the end, it just did not work out. So we were left high and dry with absolutely nothing. And they had already visited every available dojo in the area. So they had eliminated every other space within range. So it was kind of scary, but at that point I started to really introduce the idea and say, well, it sounds like, whether or not we're all saying it out loud, it sounds like we're building something from scratch. And that's what happened. So inadvertently, I backed myself into a gig where I was building my first scratch build, camera ready set, which was great, but I would have loved to have done it under different conditions because we didn't have any time to do that, but we did it anyway.
So what was the learning curve on something like that? Like I know you have a history of theater and building sets, and you've really only got to kind of worry about three walls more or less because the audience, has to see one side of it all. So like, I mean, what was your process like? Did you, I mean, you had to find a space, and we'll go through the steps that it took to get to the final product, but did you sit with the DP and talk about angles? Did you, sit with talk about lighting? And
I rarely got to talk with the DP about angles. He was already pretty busy, and he was going to come directly off of another project into this one. So he and I did not communicate a whole lot, even right through the whole process. I didn't get to be very close to the DP, which is unfortunate. And that's not anybody's doing in particular. That's just the way that it was. So what I had was a pretty green production team. Like we were all pretty green. I know I can say that I'm green, but it was the director's first feature, the AD's first feature. Jeff, you're a producer, had done a few things, but we were pretty green, and there weren't a whole lot of ideas and solutions being kicked around. It really wasn't my responsibility to solve this thing the way that ended up happening, but I took it upon myself because I just hate compromise. I just hate compromising and working with something that's not as good as it could have been. So I literally got on my feet and walked around town. I walked up and down as many streets as I could find that would have buildings that might have the features that the director had kind of suggested when he and I were talking about the space. And I ended up finding a space right under our nose, basically 2 blocks away from the very center of downtown London, Ontario. And it was a restaurant 20 years ago and was invisible. I could describe it to people who have lived here their entire lives and nobody knew what I was talking about, and yet there it was. So I got an empty, abandoned restaurant that had been purchased by a law firm. They were going to knock the whole building down and start over. And then some kind of legal entanglement had happened between them and the architects, and it was going to go to court. So there was this 6-month window where it was just going to lie dormant. And ultimately, they didn't care what we might do to it because they were going to knock it down anyway. So it was an absolute godsend. And once I had found it and brought everybody into it, well, I suppose not having a plan B also helped, but everybody said, yeah, okay, let's do this. So we basically rented the space for the shoot, and I walked into an empty room and had to build corridors and offices.
Yeah, let's talk about, you mentioned that you obviously saw the space that they wanted to shoot in, and then there was talk about, how to modify it. That went to shit. Then you had a conversation with the director about what features he wanted. So now that you found a space, what was he looking for in terms of features, and how that informed the space that you picked? Not that there was much, room to be that picky, but what was he looking to do, and what kind of materials was he giving you? How much freedom did you have? How much back and forth, like on paper, did you guys talk about that relationship? As that kind of developed a little bit.
Well, there was very little dialogue as far as texture and color and all that kind of stuff. I whenever I ask questions, I try to use terms like that, but there was very little coming back. He was pretty buried himself with more than a few other fires to put out. So it became apparent pretty early on that and this is not really, I'm not trying to beat him up or anything like that, but we just didn't speak the same language. So I was not getting the kind of feedback that I would respond to and understand immediately. It was kind of a blank slate that was coming back. I just wanted to look like this. It was more that he would refer me to other films that he was using as reference material himself. So okay. I would watch these things like, Karate Kid 2 or whatever, to get a look at a classic dojo, the way that Hollywood interprets dojos. And what do you need? You need a hardwood floor. You need
mirrors. You need some sort of mirrors and stuff.
Mirrors. You need the equipment. You need, but you want to avoid having it look like so many of the spaces that are out there right now, like these boxes. These strip mall kind of boxes. That's what was available. That's what they were threatening to use, and I just wasn't happy with that. So this place is literally one of the oldest buildings in the city. So it's 100 years old. It's got a gorgeous hardwood floor, although somewhat decrepit, and we had to repair it before that we could shoot on it safely. But it's got this awesome hardwood floor. It's a narrow, long building, and the side walls were this incredibly gorgeous, decaying yellow brick. The ceiling was 12 feet up. They'd peeled the ceiling itself off, but the second floor was visible. You got to see all of the cross members and floor joists and stuff like that from the second floor. And even just to look at it, you could tell that it was 100 years old and probably hand cut. So there was these incredible textures, and whatever light got in turned everything warm. It was amazing. So that was what I thought was the perfect starting point. It was, like a blank slate, but it already had so many of the features that we could only hope for, because you couldn't make that happen from scratch with the time and budget that we had. It was a total stroke of luck that I found it, and that it was available, and that everybody else got behind it.
Okay,
but
so
then we had to turn it into something.
Okay, so let me jump in here for a bit. You've got basically a little bit of carte blanche. The director's saying, I want a standard classic Hollywood looking dojo as evidenced in these films, which is fine. I can understand what that's like, because, when I was doing the effects on Unearthly, people would be like, so what's this creature supposed to look like? And I would just say kind of like this, and that. So completely understand where you're coming from and where he's coming from. But now back to you, you've got this blank slate, and I know time is of the essence, and you just don't have any other options. How much are you worried that if you start going off in one tangent and it's not something that he likes, what kind of reverse, plan B is there here? Or is it, once you make a decision, that's it, there is no going back? And
it's a huge concern, a huge problem. And there really wasn't a whole lot of time to be able to develop these ideas. But it's classic. I'm sure this happens every other time when films are coming together, but this is exactly what you want to avoid, because you've got to make compromises. I've already said, how much I hate it, but literally every choice made on this set was a compromise of some kind, and we were just trying to make the best one possible. So I kind of forced my hand a few times, because there just wasn't another way to go. But instead of talking in terms of, the feel and the mood and the textures and the materials and all that kind of stuff, it just became really practical really fast when we did converse. Okay, we need a bathroom. We need an office. We need the dojo. It's worn down. The guy that has it, doesn't have a lot of money, hasn't been able to maintain it. They've got this, and this features. So it didn't become about the layout in particular. It just became about what practically they actually needed, and then whether or not they had a special shot in mind. Do you need to be able to remove a panel so that the camera can back up? What do you? And there was very little feedback on that. There was one shot that I can remember that they needed, and it all was around the bathroom. So you needed to be able to have the camera positioned such that you could see the actor on the outside of the bathroom door. It had to be a swing door, and when he pushed the door in, you could see the urinal and the rest of the bathroom. Now, that is an impossibility in the real world, because obviously they engineer these things. They lay them out such that if the door swings open, you can't see a dude standing at the urinal.
Yeah.
So we had to build that to make the shot work.
So
and, that's what I did.
So you talk about knowing, the one shot that had to work. Did you have storyboards, or was it just like they're gonna figure it out once they get here? But I mean, you have the script, so you know the action that has to take place, and because you've been on set and you've worked next to the DP at this point. Well, first of all, where does this location fit into the 9-week shooting schedule?
It's all over it. It's the middle part of it. And it's a lot of it.
Okay.
The majority of the story takes place in this space.
But the shooting schedule wise, like you're shooting for 9 weeks. Are you shooting at this location off and on for 9 weeks? Or is it like week 4 that you're shooting, so you're building week 3 or?
No, I should reiterate that we were involved for 8-9 weeks, but we were shooting for 4.
Okay.
And it was like in the middle 2.
Okay.
It was basically the middle 2. This is all really crude details, but essentially it was in the middle of it. And after we got past the first location, which was the grandfather of the star this character. After we got past Grandpa's house, they started to shoot inside the dojo.
Okay,
So it was all over the place.
So what I'm getting at is you were on set for a little bit, even if you weren't there during a lot of the filming. So you've seen the amount of equipment that goes into this place, what the production has. So you've got to kind of take that into account and the action that happens on the page, I imagine, and hope that it all kind of fits. So at this point, because things are happening fast and furiously, you're kind of dictating how they're going to shoot. They're going to get to the space and they're going to, the physical, constraints of the space are one thing, but the way that you're setting up is really dictating the shots that they can get, other than what they've specified in the script is just something that they must have. And there was just no storyboards or no other conversation beyond that?
Nope, nothing. There was no other references whatsoever. It was really kind of a Hail Mary, and I was nervous because this DP was really good, and I wanted to provide him with what he needed. And I'm still pretty green when it comes to film sets, so I did not want to make a mistake as far as scale goes. But we only had so much room to provide them with all of these different solutions. So pretty early on, or like once we got the deal done for the space and I got the keys, fortunately everybody showed up immediately just to walk in and to have a look at it. And for the most part, everybody was really pleased with it. They could see the potential in it, but it was a big empty space, and we had to make an entrance corridor. We had to make closets. We had to make the shoe cubby little vestibule area. We had to make the supply closet, the bathroom, which was really a huge challenge, and then the dojo proper. And everything had kind of a different, each section had a different aesthetic. So the office side had one look to it and the dojo had another. So you go through this really crappy office area with hung suspended ceilings and fluorescent lights, and you go through the doors and there's the dramatic reveal, and suddenly you can see the high ceilings and you can see this really warm space, and it's kind of magical compared to the front end of the space. And that hall had to be built from absolute scratch. And the space that we rented was twice as long at least than we needed. So the back of the dojo was built, that wall was built about halfway back the space that we had, and then all the crew and equipment and all the building materials and tools and stuff like that were piled up behind that. And the space was lucky enough to have a second and third floor, so we had staging areas for cast and crew and all kinds of stuff. It just was, if not for its location being right downtown at the core and having to deal with the sound of buses going by, it would have been really perfect. But anyway, I had to choose the layout, basically, and there was no time to go back and forth with all of the other principals. So I literally took some chalk and off the top of my head said, okay, bathroom's going to be over here, the office is going to be over here, the corridor is going to be here, the door's there, blah, 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 blah. And I chalked it all out in about 45 minutes. I made one or two adjustments based on some feedback from other people that were available, and then we started driving nails.
So so you get the space, we'll call that day one. How many days did you have until they started shooting? Like, how long were you locked up in this space?
We had, I think from when we had just days. Geez, I can't remember how many days we had. It was
like 3 or 4, like 2 or 3. Okay,
I'm going to say 4 days.
Okay, so you have 4 days. You've got to build essentially 3 areas, an office area, the dojo proper, and a bathroom. You've got to finish the wood floors. You're doing this all off the top of your head because there's so much other things going on. You've only got really the script to work with and, a few spotty conversations and phone calls. Did everything go smoothly once you chalked it all out and you knew what you were going to do? What kind of hiccups were there? Did the floors present a problem? Did, the bathroom, take me through the process now that you got a plan, what happened?
Well, it came together magically. It was hard. It was really, really difficult, but it came together and obviously fast. Fortunately, because this was not the plan at all, fortunately, I had a really strong right arm, and that person got to take the rest of the art department and move forward in the schedule and start dressing spaces that were established, that we weren't having to scratch build, right? So set decking. And they kept working. I took the other half of the team and worked on building this dojo exclusively for those 4 or 5 days or whatever it was. And there were all kinds of problems. Like I said, the floor wasn't great. So we had to actually cut bits of the floor out of the back of the building that we weren't shooting in and put it into the front of the building because there were holes, and we obviously couldn't afford to have people fall through. And they were going to do throws and all kinds of, martial arts types of moves on this floor. So we had to make sure that was safe. We didn't have the time to finish it the way a hardwood floor would normally be finished. So we basically just got a barrel sander in there and for a whole day just destroyed the space, throwing dust everywhere, sanded it off as best we could, make the repairs, as I said, and then we just took some Murphy's oil soap and cleaned it. And after every day of shooting, we'd Murphy the thing again to give it the gloss. But we couldn't afford to actually put any kind of toxic, coating on it, hard coating on it to give it a super sheen because it would have stunk and killed everybody that was in there. The place did not breathe that well. There was no electricity. It was abandoned. So there's no running water. I guess there was a little running water, and there was a skeleton of electrical. There was basically just a few bulbs hanging front to back so that you could walk through and not fall into one of these holes. But this was not a functional building. This was just an almost abandoned building ready to be knocked down. So we had to deal with all those issues as we were going along as well.
So did you guys have to bring a generator in to power, like not only the shoot, but, work lights or?
There was enough juice running through the building that we had enough to light it. It did become a bit of a problem, though, because when we first started hanging all the lights that we added to the space, we blew some fuses and that kind of thing because they had stripped everything out.
Right.
So there were unforeseen problems. Like we just couldn't figure out what was going on. And at one point, the lights were flickering and we couldn't figure out how and why. And we had to get an electrician in there to help partially rewire the building just to make it work for us, adding a wiring back in so we didn't overload it. But yeah, we hung 8 panels of fluorescent lights in there in the office areas and a complete suspended ceiling because the ceiling was 10 or 12 feet up, and we had to hang this one that kind of made it claustrophobic and crappy looking in there, and this cheap, sound panels.
Yeah.
We had to do all of that. But the hardest thing that we did was the bathroom. It didn't make any sense if you think about it as far as the real world goes, but this tiny little rundown dojo had a bathroom with a swinging door and 2 stand-up urinals and then 1 toilet that was closed in. That combination of events is, that doesn't happen ever.
Right.
And finding urinals, that we could just borrow was impossible. But we actually found 2 functional urinals that we assembled and put on the wall, just fake the piping that led to them. So they were just dummies. They did not operate, but they looked so convincing that when we were done, that people ended up using them, and that became a real problem through the shoot. It was really gross.
Well, that's a testament to how real the set must have looked if people were just popping in there using them. I mean, you got to feel good about that. So, let's talk. So shoot happens day 5. Does the director see the space the day before, or does he arrive on set with the DP like the day of? Okay, here's where we're shooting.
Yeah, no, it wasn't the day of. It was prior to that. They came in and we had everything up, and there was no plan B. And I was hugely relieved because they were happy with it. They could see that they could get the shots that they wanted. They were a little nervous about how small it was, but the DP came in and said, "This is not a problem," and that's what everybody wanted to hear. So I was just dealing with the space that I had. It's not impossible to think that a dojo like they were describing to me wouldn't appear in a space of those dimensions. The concern for me just was whether or not the crew, the camera especially, would have the room that it needed to be able to maneuver and get everything it wanted. But when the DP came in and said, "Yeah, this is awesome," and everybody was really happy, then that was great.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you listening out there, usually to make a space film friendly, in my opinion, I think you need the space that would be realistic, like a bedroom, and then ideally either twice the space or at least like 30% more to house all the crew and the gear in order to shoot that space properly. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, that's probably more often the case. But in this particular case, because of what we were dealing with and because I had no information on how to provide them with that kind of a solution, I was really creating a real dojo. That's
Right.
kind of what ended up happening. I ended up building what would be the real thing. So it actually had ceilings and it had walls and it had light switches and all that kind of stuff. And none of them moved or shifted or anything like that. It was really like suddenly this thing appeared. And that's why people were fooled and started using the bathroom, because it did actually kind of look like it had always been there, which was great. And getting that kind of feedback felt really good. But other than the fact that the back wall to the dojo ended at about 10 feet so that you could see over it and past it through to the other space, which we just did not have the time to put anything up there. It didn't end up being a problem at all, though, anyway, because the DP never shot up in that angle and
Right.
was able to create. And this one scene, he's really pretty brilliant, because we had this gap in the wall. We ended up stacking boxes up in it to make it look like a storage area. And he never even put that directly on camera. What he did was, there's this morning after scene inside the dojo where they've slept in the space overnight or something like that, and they're waking up, and he, with his lighting team, had created an effect to make it look like there was kind of a carriage house window above that back wall that the light was coming through. So they misted the place up. They put the fog machine in there and had light coming through kind of a jury-rigged apparatus to make it look like it was being contained and just coming through a window.
Cool.
Man, did it look good. You'd
Yeah.
never know. You'd
I,
never know.
I
So he had a big part in making that space successful too. We did some great work, but again, Pasha was the final little sprinkle of magic.
So that was the dojo. That's probably your big piece de resistance on that film. That's where you left your mark. But I know there was another set that I think was it like the climax of the film. I mean, I've only seen
Yeah.
a few official
You're talking about
photos.
the arena?
Yeah, I've seen a few official photos that have been released, and I saw the dojo, and I think it looks great. I mean, it had Michael Biehn in the shot, which is great. I mean, to work with that kind of talent, which is always
Yeah.
nice.
It was a first for me, an actual Hollywood name, Michael Biehn, Aliens,
Tomb,
Terminator,
Tombstone.
Abyss. Yeah. Yeah, it was great. And I actually got to perform, so to speak, loosely using that word, in a scene with Michael Biehn. So that was the highlight of my time on that set. I got to play the ceiling tile that dropped on him, but I was basically hanging off of his shoulder for one shot. So it's just cool.
Well, yeah, that's cool. And I was going to ask you about some of the coolest moments. Maybe we'll come back to that because, geez, I'd love to hang off his shoulder and just talk to him for a little bit. But the arena, which is, like I'm guessing third act kind of material, like the big kind of fights in Rocky and the big tournaments in Karate Kid movies and
Exactly.
stuff.
Yeah, that's what it was.
But we're talking MMA here, so there hasn't been a whole lot of MMA films, out there. There's a few. There's Warrior. I know the Disney release, and a few other kind of more underground indie kind of ones. But again, was it the same thing, or was there more time dedicated to this, or was it just like
It was the big dramatic final set piece for sure, and we got really lucky again, and we got the cooperation of a local landholder, Farhi, who owns a lot of the core area of London and owns the property that used to be the Central Branch Library, which is a gorgeous old building that has been gutted. People have been kicking tires on converting it into housing or office space or something like that. So it had been completely gutted, stripped down to foundation, pillars, and that kind of stuff. And once again, you'd think it was a theme or something like that, but once again, we were dealing with a lovely dramatic space with lots of character, but very little electricity and no running water, no heat, and all the usual. So it had its own challenges too, but we had the main floor of this old Art Deco building that we got to build the cage in and then dress as though this is where the crowds were going to assemble to watch the big climactic fight. And that was pretty cool. That was working on a scale that I hadn't dealt with before. And we were already pretty tapped out, because what I haven't mentioned so far is that the budget had not been altered, despite the fact that the plan A, the original plan when I came onto this project, was that we were going to shoot in an established operating real world dojo and just redress it. And then that fell through, and we switched to scratch building a complete dojo and all the features that we needed. We didn't get any more time or people or money to do that. So that really put a pinch on the money that we had to spend towards the end when we got to the big climactic scenes. And Pasha ended up being instrumental and key in making that scene work too. So we did a lot with color and smoke and just lighting and stuff like that to kind of close the space back in when and where we wanted it to, because it was just going to be a big naked space. The biggest problem with the arena space was that two of the four walls in there were gigantic white concrete slab walls that looked awful. There was just no character to them. When you rotate around, the panel four and panel three, you could see the pillars, and because they'd been stripped, they looked decayed. It was just all kinds of really gorgeous urban decay. When you threw a light at it, it was interesting.
Right.
But you turn the other way, the backdrop of the arena area were these horrible, pale, white slab concrete walls with no character whatsoever. So that was a big problem for us. And we ended up enlisting the aid of local urban artists, graffiti artists here in town, and paying the materials. They were cool enough to come out for just the cost of materials and the challenge of covering that entire space with some absolutely breathtaking graffiti artwork.
So
that sealed the deal.
So when I think of a big arena space or like a big fight match, the star of that space has got to be the ring, or in this case, the cage.
Yeah.
Is that something you guys built, or because you're gonna not be able to convince a lot of people?
Yeah, there was talk about doing that, but in the end, they rented the real deal, which was the way to go for sure.
So they rented an actual octagon, and
not an octagon. It only had 6 sides because.
So it's a hexagon.
I forget who owns the rights. If you can believe this, there's something out there like the UFC owns exclusively the right to use an 8-sided cage.
Wow.
So you can use a cage, but it can't have 8 sides.
Huh.
I did not know that, but that's the case, and it came out of Toronto, I think, from a company that does just that, rents out and delivers cages for regional matches.
They rent out the Hexagon Inc., not Heptagon, not 7 sides. That'd be crazy. Hexagon.
It doesn't matter as long as it's not 8.
Exactly. And so then you guys shipped it from Toronto, and you got it in London, and you got it in the space. I mean, obviously the space was big enough for this. Could you tailor the cage to the space at all, or was it just like, this is going to fit or it's not going to fit?
Well, that was fast and loose too, because the people that ordered the cage and our team didn't communicate a whole lot. And there wasn't a lot of information back and forth about its final dimensions. We took our best guess, and it all worked out pretty well. The only modification we made basically was that it had the option of being assembled with an apron all the way around the outside of the cage at the same level as the fighters would stand at.
Right.
And there was no room for that. So we just knocked that off. So the steps basically just walked directly into the doors.
Yeah.
And then you were on the fighting level.
Very cool. Very cool. Those are the two big things that I remember us talking about as you're kind of going through this, what you were up against, and then the set photos that have been released, kind of confirm that. The last thing I want to talk to you about, and we touched on it a bit earlier, was the Michael Biehn moment. What other cool stuff, did you experience while being on a production that big, working with those people, working with a budget that, probably bigger than anything else you worked with? Just give me, kind of your top 5 moments that were really cool.
Standing in for an actor that got cut, that was awesome. So I continue my streak of being able to play a supporting role in every one of the movies that I work on. I hope to carry on with that. I got really lucky and fit the police uniform of the actor that got cut. I don't know what the problem was, but they basically got right almost to the day they required an actor to play a police officer, and they didn't have an actor to do it. So, and this combination of people had no idea that I act at all. Like, they had no idea that I had any experience performing. So when I suggested myself, they did not respond positively initially, but they didn't have any choice. So essentially I put on the uniform and I came out and I said, it fits, it looks great. They had to agree. So I got to play, it was just a small supporting part. But what was fun about it was that I got to play opposite a really a cool guy, a well-seasoned actor out of Toronto. So we had a lot of fun with it. And we got to stand under the rain machine that our art department, other people, I didn't have anything to do with it because I was kind of learning the role very quickly. This rain machine. So they shot it at night, and they just shot water at us for, I don't know, an hour while they shot this scene. And it was fun. So it was a new kind of experience for me. I love that, and the scene looks good. I've seen some shots of it. Um, Speaking with like being in that one scene with Michael Biehn was great. That was a geek moment for me. And then happened to be close by when we shot in the arena for a completely different series of scenes. And everybody else kind of wandered off at this one point and left me within arm's reach of him. And he just started telling me stories. And that was worth the price of admission right there.
That's awesome.
Probably worked on that movie for free if I could have afforded that. Just to be able to stand there and listen to stories about the first time that he was up in Canada, and a comedy that he had worked on back before his career became kind of action oriented. He kind of had the early part of his career was kind of like Kurt Russell, like his Disney era.
Right, like his like family kind of tongue-in-cheek Disney silly era. Yeah,
the computer that wore tennis shoes. Yeah, well, Michael Biehn sort of had a phase like that as well, which I wasn't aware of until I started talking to him. And he had this great story about a visual gag about him being the guy driving this convertible and following a cement truck. And then, I don't remember if the car hit the cement truck or what, but eventually, the gag is cartoon style. The cement trough would swing around and just filled the convertible with cement.
Right.
But he got it in the face, like he said, it hit him like a ton of bricks and almost ripped his head off.
Oh, jeez.
It was, so it looked funny on camera, but it kind of was borderline dangerous. And the funniest part of the story was that after the fact, he was watching the guy clean up the mess. And this guy had heavy rubber gloves up to his elbows. And he was basically in like waders, hip waders. And like all the stuff that he was using and wearing were like I don't know what you call it, like chem suit level, protection.
Right.
And Bean's like, hey, what's with the gear?
Yeah.
And the guy just is casually pushing all this crap around with a broom, and he says, "Oh, that's asbestos. That shit'll kill you." After he was shot in the face with a drop of it.
Yeah.
So, good times. Yeah, those are the kind of war stories that you want to hear from people like Michael Biehn, who has been a guy I love to watch on screen for years and years and years. So that was cool. And the other favorite part that I liked was that also in that big abandoned library, we convinced the director to move one location from one room in the building to another room in the building, and the greasy fight promoter's office went from something traditional to the boiler room in the belly of the building with all the pipes and the giant furnace, this old school, thing in the background, which was really fun to work with, and I think again added something to the film that wouldn't have been there previously. So I was proud of that too. I didn't have a whole lot to do with dressing that space. That was the other half of the team, and they did an awesome job. Yeah,
you gotta love boiler rooms. There's just texture and depth and shapes and sounds and stuff that you can't get anywhere. I remember we used one in on Earthly, and that's that's one of the call it marquee sets. I mean, most of the film shot outside in the forest, but of the interior stuff, it definitely has character, and it's right
boiler,
there.
That's right. I remember that shot. That did come out good, and that is the very boiler in the basement of the building that I am speaking from right now.
There you go. So, Jordan, we always end our interviews with "Let's play a game," kind of a hypothetical "what if A, B, and C" kind of question to you.
Okay,
so let's play a game.
All right.
Okay. Question 1, A, if you will. You get a chance to design a Spielberg film. Do you have any preference on genre, and how do you pitch yourself to him?
Geez, well, if we're moving forward, it's going to be a biopic, probably.
But I'm asking you, do you have a preference to genre? If you get to design a Spielberg film, any preference to genre? He's still got Robopocalypse possibly coming out sometime.
Doesn't sound hopeful of that one, but I would hope that I could get in on something like a Raiders or a Tintin or something like that, a little more fantasy adventure. That would be fun.
And I guess just how do you pitch yourself to him as a kind of a part B to that question?
Please.
Please.
Yeah, that would be tough. I would take that a lot more seriously, but I'll do anything. I'll serve sandwiches. Whatever you can give me to do, I would be happy to do, Mr. Spielberg. Thank you.
Okay, so the second question I got for you, and this will be one that you're going to be conflicted to answer on principle alone. You're greenlit to remake any film. What is it? Why? that film, and how is it different, and what's your role in it?
Okay, I'm not going to go after any of the things that are that popular or beloved. I'm probably going to get beat up for this, but there's two that I'm most interested in.
Well, I want to hear the one film that you get greenlit to
To
remake
remake? Okay.
based off an amazing pitch. So, what film is it, and what in your pitch about remaking it sells you? How is it different than the original, and what role do you take on?
Well, okay, I'm going to put myself right in the boiling water that everybody that does a remake puts themselves in, suggesting that they can take an original property and just make it into something new that has a reason to exist on its own, right? Without it being just a carbon copy. And the one film that I keep going back to that for whatever reason calls to me is Phantom of the Paradise, which is a really strange early Brian De Palma, Paul Williams music, Phantom of the Opera, Faust kind of retelling. It's a musical. It was kind of the companion piece. They weren't connected in any way, but it was sort of another Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't really explain why I'm fascinated with that thing, but I would love to play with the visual themes that they played around with that. They were, I mean, they're playing around with classic stories, like, you know, and I would love to be able to play in that playground too. And I would love to be able to work with Paul Williams. Oh man, to have him come back and work with it with me on it. I don't know if he's still game for that kind of thing, but huge fan of that man too. So yeah.
Would you just like to be the writer on that, or like writer director, or just producer, or?
If I had to choose one role, then it would be designer. I'd rather be production designer on that one because that's what I keep getting haunted by is pictures of what, you know, the Phantom's costume would look like second time around. And that would make people furious. You know, it's the same thing that's going on with RoboCop right now. How can it be RoboCop without it looking like RoboCop? It's not like there's anything wrong with the original RoboCop.
Right.
So everybody that's seeing these early previews of the new suit is disappointed because it somehow comes off looking generic, and I can't disagree with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would no doubt be under the same gun to produce something that was familiar and yet not a knockoff and not an insult to the original. I don't know. Tough gig. I don't encourage anybody to get involved in remakes. Let's just try to make original material. How about we do that?
Well, that's why I thought you might try to argue based on the principle of the question.
Well, I conceded that I'm going to be in that, so I surrendered to that immediately. Not that I'm 100% comfortable with it, but that would be mine. I would love to play in the playground that is Phantom of the Paradise.
Okay, the last question, and the last question of Always Let's Play a Game, is a little bit more personal, a little bit more orientated to where you are in your career. This is kind of more of a what if. In 10 years from now, you've accomplished all your goals. Kind of now what's next?
Geez, I'm exhausted. That sounds busy. I got lots to do. What's next?
I mean, we've talked before on and off the air in other shows, on other segments and other things. The main thing that you're looking to do now is just kind of be a driving force behind a project. You also want to, sell some screenplays and help out across the board. Let's say you do all that, whether it's in 10, 5, 20 years. What next? What happens after you accomplish your goals?
Well, my goals are constantly evolving, which is why people say I don't have an attention span. But it's never been about a particular task for me, which is what I think makes it look like I just hop from one thing to another. It's really about the process and about everything that I can learn along the way. So, if I've acted a role that I'm 100% satisfied with and can move on from that, if I've, say, been fortunate enough to direct something that I'm 100% satisfied with, designed a project that I'm 100% satisfied with, you can imagine how difficult that is going to be to achieve as it is.
Yeah.
Then I would probably be interested in where this medium is going. Filmmaking. What's it going to be? There's, hugely exciting advances in the evolution going on in television right now. And film is trying to reinvent itself too, right? They've gone back to 3D. They've experimenting with frame rates now and crazy high res. There's really interesting talk about changing theaters, like redesigning theaters so that it once again becomes something dramatically different than what you can get at home. And those kind of advances are interesting to me, and how television and film theater, like movie theaters, and what the internet is going to do to provide a platform for visual storytelling too, and how all that stuff is going to fuse together. And no doubt it will, in my opinion, at some point. I like that, so I'd love to be in on those conversations, I would think.
All right. So from actor, creator, performer to maybe innovator in the film industry on some level.
Sure, I'd be proud to wear that title. If I could contribute to something, groundbreaking, that would be great with me. Let's hope.
Well, I can't disagree with any of that. I will thank you for appearing as a guest on another Wired In Network product. It's been fun hearing about Tapped and the two challenges, the major challenges and the hiccups within those challenges that you faced.
There's always hiccups, yeah. It's about how you get past them, and we did well. So look for that movie coming out maybe, I guess, next year. Tapped.
Yeah, Tapped, starring Michael Biehn and Cody Hackman, I believe, is the main character. Doesn't he play the main character?
Yes, he is the lead. Yes, for sure.
Well, fantastic.
And Krzysztof Szynski too, fan favorite fighter Krzysztof Szynski, who also had a cameo role. And Here Comes the Boom was the bad guy in this one. Great guy. Can't say enough about him. Awesome. Another person that I really enjoyed meeting.
Should have cast that guy as Bane, man. That would have been great.
Yeah, I think he's capable of a lot more than anybody's given him a chance to do yet. So I hope he continues on with acting.
Very good, very good. All right. Well, like I said, I'll say thanks for being on our guest again. For the rest of our listening audience out there, this has been The Trenches, where we interview filmmakers from around the world to hear what their lives are like as they continually produce content and the challenges they come up against and just kind of what makes them tick in and around those duties. So thanks for listening in. This has been from the Wired In Network, and I am Rob McCallum, your host. We will catch you the next time around.